Welcome back to another episode of Pokemon Knowledge. Earlier tonight I started recording a video just talking about the current state of the Pokemon hobby, and that video is probably going to get released later today. But as I was making that video, I just started going off on a little bit of a tangent talking about the price difference between a CGC graded card and a PSA graded card. And I said, you know what, I got to just stop recording this video right now because I went so far off topic, and I'm just going to make it its own video. So that's what this video is going to be about. And I guess there's a lot of stuff to take in the mind, right? We're going to have to talk about the actual grading card company, the history of the company, what people's thought processes are, the psychology behind it, and then the actual physical grades. Because I'll tell you right now, from the very few amount of CGC 9s that I've seen, I haven't held a lot of CGC 9s in my hand. The main reason being because I'm still waiting on all my submissions to get back from CGC. But with that said, I've seen a lot of high quality scans, at least on eBay and other auction sites that have good photos of the front and back. I'm able to at least see the condition for the most part. Yeah, with high quality res photos, it's still hard to see the actual surface of the cards. Sometimes like maybe print lines could hide a little bit if the camera's at a poor angle, stuff like this. But with that said, from what I've seen so far, like a CGC 9 is extremely comparable to a PSA 9. Meaning, I think if you were to crack either slab and resubmit it to the other company for cross-grading or whatever you want to do, or just resubmit it in general, I think you're very likely to see the same grade. And that kind of brings you to the famous line, buy the card and not the grade. But we're not really seeing that. And, the reason I say that is because I'm seeing such big price differences. Like for CGC cards and PSA, I'm seeing like a 30% price difference sometimes. And, one of the reasons I say this is because I just bought, I spent $80 on this card. I went to buy the same exact card at auction for PSA, and it ended up selling for $130. That card's the same card, same grade, mine being CGC and the other one that sold being a PSA. $50 price difference for the same card. I was actually shocked by that. So it kind of has to bring you to the question, well, why are we seeing such big price differences? Because I bet you a lot of the people doing these purchases would also tell you to buy the card, not the grade. So why are we seeing people, send so many cards to CGC, but yet the prices aren't really at the same par, the same level at PSA? And we'll try to answer that. I think it's a lot of little things. I think the first one is just because PSA has been around longer and kind of been the go-to grading company for Pokemon, that, people trust them more, or they have more faith in their grading skills. Listen, that's not really super true. And I think Gary King Pokemon, he put it very well in his last video, pretty much saying that PSA grading for Pokemon cards would not have existed if a very small group of people, Gary being one of them, if he didn't grade with PSA, the Pokemon market as we know it for graded cards could have very easily went in the way of Beckett. And I'm telling you, that's the honest truth. In the history of grading for this hobby, if those guys did not decide to go with PSA originally, PSA would not be the go-to for grading for Pokemon. But it was because of them that, PSA has become, call it the gold standard or whatever you want to call it. So I think you have a lot of people with that mindset who haven't actually been in the hobby long enough to really have that mindset be justified, because they probably personally haven't graded like nearly the amount of cards that some of these real OG Pokemon guys have graded. So, but I think that also makes them smarter, right? Because they're not fools, meaning it's very easy for them to see the price differences between graded cards, that if they send a card to PSA, they're going to get more for their card. So I think the big push, though, really boils down to just the turnaround times, right? people just eventually got so frustrated with PSA's turnaround times that they wanted to just get their cards graded in order to keep like that same sort of mindset. That's the mindset of, hey, if I'm going to pay to get my card graded, I may as well get it graded by whoever the top of the industry is. And then also we've seen like a lot of the third-party submitters pop up for PSA. So it just made it so much easier. Like a lot of these graded gems and stuff, graded gem, the US branch hadn't actually been around for long, and I never got a chance to submit any cards to graded gem. Not that I would have had to, I could have just sent them the PSA myself. But what I wanted to do was just test out, receiving process and everything. And I was thought, oh, this would be a fun video. I never even got around to it. Price increases happen and life got in the way. But, like I said, between Gem Mint and Ludkins and all these like third-party graders, and there's a lot of just, random websites, random people you could send their cards to. They would send them away for you, which, not to get off on too much of a tangent, but be very careful the third parties you guys are sending your cards to. If you're sending your cards to just random YouTubers or, Joe Smo who's not insured or has no clue like what they're doing, they're more or less just doing this as a hobby, don't send your cards to those guys. Like, at least keep it with one of the more trusted big guys. But because that process was so easy for people, I think a lot of people flooded to PSA on top of just the value of the cards and all that. But then CGC being new, it was a very polarizing time at the very beginning of CGC coming out. Either people loved CGC instantly, which was unjustified. The reason I say it was unjustified is because when they first started grading cards, people jumped on that bandwagon so quick just because they had experience, grading comic books and other collectibles. People just instantly thought they would be good at grading cards. We have, in fact, saw that was true, that their grading scales were much stricter, and that, their turnaround times at the very beginning, yes, they were better. So, like, a lot of the stuff at the very beginning ended up being justified. But there was a lot of fears people had, especially for new companies. And I think the big one was, yeah, they have 30-day turnaround times and they're making jokes and stuff that, oh, well, we could do 30-day turnaround times, no problem. Why can't PSA do it? And that we've already seen that just get thrown out the window. And, maybe that will be a meme in the future, right? Like PSA saying, 30-day turnaround times is something easy. But like I said, a lot of the validation for CGC was a little bit unwarranted at the beginning. I think we've seen a lot of people come around to him. Even a lot of the people who, I think their big complaint at the beginning a lot had to do with the labeling. I don't think anybody really had a lot of complaints with the actual physical slabs, because CGC slabs, in my opinion, are far superior than PSA's. They have a better, feel to them. They have a better look to them. They're way more translucent. Like, the slab itself is better. Yeah, there was like that one video where somebody cracked open a slab, and yeah, that one went super viral. But we haven't really seen that since. But I think the big one is a lot of people don't like the labeling, which I'm the opposite. I actually like the labeling. I personally don't like PSA's labeling. I think PSA's labeling is very recognizable, but I think it's very small. There's not enough information on there. They don't have subgrades. PSA has a lot, not really going for them. But then it was a question of, well, if you're going to go with CGC, then you would only go with CGC if you expected or you wanted subgrades, because that's something PSA doesn't offer. So yeah, that would make sense. But even at their bulk prices, to add subgrades now bumped you over the price of PSA. And one of the huge selling points for CGC was just the fact that they were cheaper than PSA. And, with PSA's price increases, they're way cheaper. There's hands down cheaper. No doubt about that. Especially their walkthrough is still very cheap, comparable for like a walkthrough service. But with that said, price increases, there's a lot of stuff you got to take into account when comparing slabs. But the topic of this video is more, why are we seeing such a price difference, right? You have to take all this stuff into consideration in order to have this conversation, because it's not just as simple as saying, people just don't like CGC or people only like PSA. It's not that easy. There's so many little finite details to really talk about. And, one of the big things you'll see too is a lot of collectors might only have PSA graded collections, and people don't really want to, have slabs of a lot of different grading companies, because, maybe it's an aesthetic thing or it's a comfort level thing. Maybe it's a combination of both. Personally, me, I don't care the grading card company. I just like to, get my cards slabbed. I think they look good. I think it's more protection for my cards. I personally don't care the grading card company, but I could very much understand that some people would only want PSA, graded cards. But what we could potentially see in the future, because PSA graded cards are two things. One, they're a premium over CGC cards. And then second off, if you wanted to send your own cards away to PSA with turnaround times of, astronomical levels, it would take you so long to get your cards back to really start working out how you're going to do your collection of keeping the highest grade, selling the lowest grade, stuff like that. So you can see potentially a lot of new collectors having that same sort of mindset that older PSA collectors have, that we're only going to collect one type of slab. So you have all the people out there only collecting PSA. It's a possibility that all these new collectors coming in are only want to collect CGC cards. And it's for the two reasons I said, turnaround times, and they can pick up the same exact grade for cheaper. So that's definitely a possibility. And if they're sending cards away for CGC, the turnaround times are, a lot less. So they might be more incentivized if they want to get their cards back. So we'll see where the market winds up there. I'd be very interested in the long term if we ever start to see the prices level out more, where then it gets to the point where you can just go with either company. I think where the big make or break points will end up being in the long run is for super modern cards that get graded, at very high, fast turnaround times. If you start to see huge price differences between PSAs or CGC. And, don't get me wrong too, PSA also have master set lists and all this stuff going for them. So there's a lot going on there. I think what we'll see happen in the market is that eventually one of these companies will be able to get their act together, whether it's PSA, whether it's CGC. I think it might be a little too late for Beckett. I think it's definitely too late for SGC, just prices are way too much. Turnaround times are great, but prices are too high. I think we'll eventually see either CGC or PSA get their act together. And if either one of those companies, through some kind of miracle, some kind of act of God, some kind of absolutely amazing business moves, factory space, warehouse space, receiving times, all this, they get it all together. Whichever one of them is able to come out of this huge flood of cards on top, I think will run away with the show. If you ever remember D2 Mighty Ducks, remember the scene where he's you lost it for yourself. That's kind of what PSA did. If PSA was able to keep it together, keep turnaround times lower, maybe we're able to have a little bit of more hindsight than they were, or faster hiring processes, or the million different things that PSA would have had to do in a science fiction type of world where, things were easier. If they didn't lose, as much market as they did and have such high turnaround times, you probably would not have seen CGC even be able to really get on the market and gain a good foothold. So because CGC is now getting flooded with cards and the turnaround times are increasing, which, get ready, guys. Put your tinfoil hats on right now. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, PSA did see that the success CGC was having and that they were seeing CGC having these lower turnaround times. If you're in PSA and you're saying, listen, right now, we have a huge backlog of cards. All these cards we're going to get paid for whenever we can send them out. So we have a ton of, backlog. We're still having a huge demand. Cards are still coming in. How can we potentially kill our competitors while still grading cards? There is a possibility, and again, this is why it's tinfoil hat, and this is why this is a YouTube channel, and I could make crazy statements. There is a chance that some really smart executive at PSA said the only way we can kill CGC and stunt their growth is to give them more business than they could handle. And that would be like very high level thinking. It would be a huge business gamble. It would be a lot of potential lost revenue for them. Or you can do it where PSA knew the amount of submissions that they were getting. And at the end of the day, the only people that really, really knew how many submissions they were getting was PSA. So if they said, listen, even if a quarter of our submissions or however many they were getting, a half of their submissions went to CGC, they might have considered the fact that they can cripple CGC's ability to take in new cards. And in the long run, cripple CGC. I don't know if there's any truth to that, but I love a good freaking hypothetical. And I would love to hear you guys down in the comments, what you think of that hypothetical. It's definitely super tinfoil hat, next level type thinking. Again, this is a YouTube channel where all I do is throw up memes, so you got to cut me some slack. But listen, if that is the case, and that's what they were doing, was trying to kill their competitors, they might actually be winning at that. So what does that mean? That means if PSA could potentially get their turnaround times back to, a reasonable amount, and I think in the future for graded cards, assuming demand still stays pretty strong, I think a realistic turnaround times, even though it would be very long and still on the high end, would be 6 months. I think that would be the magic number that could become the new socially acceptable norm, at least for, and of course I'm talking bulk, I'm not talking about walkthroughs or stuff like that. But that would be the magic number a lot of these companies are going to have to try to get back to. And I don't know logistically wise, what they would have to do. I think PSA made the right choice by closing down. I think CGC is making the wrong choice by not closing down. But you got to ask yourself this hypothetical too, right? Let's say, well, we don't have to say let's say, but PSA is closed. Beckett's still open. CGC is still open. What would happen if CGC and Beckett also closed the doors? What would be the other viable options? I don't think there would really be that many. Yeah, there's GMA, but they're too small to handle any kind of influx, and they're not well known enough. And I think they're great graders. Actually, I have a few of their cards, but that's neither here nor there. So let's just say CGC, Beckett, PSA, close the doors, lock them up. We're not accepting any new submissions till, undetermined date. The backup of cards that people would start to have would grow so quickly that whoever was the first company to say, okay, we're ready to open up the doors again, would just get an avalanche of cards. I don't even know what the total amount of graded cards, spread out through all three of those companies could potentially be. It's got to be some astronomical number. And I know, especially with PSA, you got to keep in mind isn't just Pokemon. They're sports cards too. So you got a lot of the sports fan. You got a lot of these new sets still coming out. A lot of people, doing box breaks, opening packs, and they're pulling out a lot of, baseball, hockey, basketball cards that they want to have slabbed up by PSA that they can't because PSA has cut back on so many of those submissions with the exception of the extremely high tier. But there's also a chance that PSA, by shutting down all other services, might be able to, stay afloat as a company for the near term, just accepting these extremely high grading fees for these walkthrough cards. You got to think, like, if you can make over $100 to grade a card or $10 to grade a card, and you're still getting a ton of cards in every day, it'll be very interesting how PSA starts to roll back, opening up different, grading tiers, meaning. So right now they're just walkthroughs, but as you keep going back all the way eventually till you get the bulk, you have to just open up one at a time. Make sure you can meet demand for whatever that tier is until eventually you get down to bulk. And there's no way we see that happen by July 1st. So all the people out there thinking PSA bulk service will be opened up by July is, I don't know what they're smoking, but they're smoking something. There's no way, because there's just too many cards out there waiting. But that brings us back to the topic of which company is going to come out of this on top, because one of them will, I think, in the long run, or maybe we just see like a hybrid market where the graded card market is just a bunch of different slabs. And I guess we already saw that for Beckett. Maybe Beckett being a little bit more like Magic the Gathering. But it is just an interesting time to live in. But all the way back to the beginning of this video, back to the topic at hand. Why are we seeing such a price difference? I think at the end of the day, it's just going to come down to people are going to pay for what they want to pay, and there's nothing you can do and there's nothing I can do to stop them. If they want to pay more money for the same card because it comes in a different slab for all the reasons I just mentioned, I think that's just what it's going to be at the end of the day. Now, will we ever start to see CGC slabs selling for the same amount as PSA or potentially more? Potentially more, no. Same amount, maybe. Will you see a couple outliers here and there where a CGC card sells higher than a PSA graded? Sure. I think that Illustrator Pikachu that was graded by CGC, was huge for them as a market leader for grading cards. I do want to know more the background of that card, unless that story already exists. If somebody actually does know the background of where the hell that Pikachu Illustrator came from and how there was a raw card floating out there, or unless somebody cracked like an authentic PSA slab and decided to send it to CGC, I don't know. But I would like to know if anybody knows the backstory to that. But yeah, so that's going to be the end of this video. It is just a long rant. But hey, listen, if you somehow listen to me rant and you're still not subscribed to this channel, hit that subscribe button. Other than that, hit the like button, and I'll catch you on the next video.